Right. I haven't given much thought to how this bit of this morning is going to be structured, but I thought we could have some interaction between the four of us, and then include some questions or comments from the floor. Does that sound all right?
I think we should have comments from the floor.
Comments from the floor. Dave, did you? Kim?
Did you notice that last picture that was shown? Michael's wearing exactly the same bow tie as today. I'd like to ask two questions, but before I do it, I'd like to preface with a personal comment. I'm Michael's uncle, and I want to congratulate him on a well-designed career and wish him happiness in his retirement. I'd like to direct a question to Dr. Russell first of all. In this technique, you're pumping the cuff above systolic pressure. Is there an ethical problem with maintaining that for a given time? So that's question one, the ethics of the technique. And to the other two, this business of awareness. There's no mention of cultures in here, but I think culture plays a large part in our tolerance of pain. I well remember reading a book by Pearl Buck called The Good Earth, and in that this takes place in China, and in that the wife is about to produce, and she won't have any help. She goes into fields and has a baby and comes back with a baby. Now, there's no mention of what happens before, but that's the way that they did it then. And I'd like to ask a question to both of you. Where does acupuncture come into all this? Because we hear of major surgery going on under acupuncture. And I know there have been various theories about posterior root competitive inhibitor effects, but there must be a large awareness and cultural factor involved in that. So there was two questions. One is the ethics of the technique, and the second is awareness and culture.
In terms of the, if you like, the ethics of the acid forearm technique, we know that plastic surgeons and orthopedic surgeons will have a tourniquet on the arm for usually about 2 hours at a time before they let it down. The cuff for the isolated forearm, it's padded. I blow it up just to below 200 most of the time, and it's only there for 20 to 30 minutes, and then it comes down. I've seen some other papers where they look at the patient's systolic blood pressure and put it 50 millimeters above that. But again, it's only there for a relatively short time. And there has never been any issue yet with the tourniquet in the isolated forearm studies and things. So that's all I can really say about it. I don't think it's an ethical problem at all, personally.
I think the other question was acupuncture, wasn't it? Very little to say. I haven't studied it, but clearly acupuncture doesn't work on everyone, or on even the majority. In fact, it works only on a minority for these major surgeries. So clearly there is a lot of pre-surgical, you could say, attitude, positive attitude towards it. There's obviously a bit of the mechanisms you mentioned, but that's all I can say. I don't know if you know more about acupuncture.
Not about acupuncture, but I think in terms of culture generally, there's at least two things going on. And one of them is your expectations. If you expect that this is the way it is, it's not very nice, but it's normal, then you will tolerate a lot more pain than if you think, this is a sign that something terrible is happening. And your body learns your body sort of learns those connections between things as well. So if you've got chronic pain, then you will get sensitized to the fact you start doing something that might cause you pain later in that action, and it starts to feel painful straight away because your brain's learned that this is going to hurt, I'll make it hurt now and she'll stop. So I think that expectations play a big role in the experience of pain, but also in whether you interpret it as distressing. But because of that, if you are more relaxed or you trust that the acupuncture is going to work, then you are actually going to increase your resistance, your resilience to pain as well. So I think there's complex things happening. There's the interaction between the relaxation and your actual sort of physiological experience of pain, and there's the psychological interpretation of the pain. So yes, I would expect cultural differences. And I know, Michael, you had an interesting conversation about awareness.
Yeah, I was saying the last Memory and Awareness in Anaesthesia conference actually took place in Tokyo 2 years ago now, and I became aware whilst I was in Japan that something like 99.9% of all Japanese people are cremated rather than buried when they die. The significance of that is that for some of the accounts from the NAT5 reports, patients seem to indicate that some patients thought that they had died on the operating theatre table, and that's why everything was black and they couldn't move, but they could still hear. And they thought that that was the sort of state that you go into when you're dead. And this kind of relates to the view of some children, that, of many children in fact, that Granny who's died a few months ago might need some food in the graveyard. Maybe they'll be cold, so concern of a continuing existence underneath a grave. And we see that also in popular culture with the rise of the zombies, and you'll remember Michael Jackson's Thriller. Now, if you imagine a society where nobody is buried, that doesn't make much sense, does it? And, you know, the families all witness the burning of the body and take part in a ritual involving pulling out the bones. So the idea that bodies are in the ground doesn't come into Japanese culture. So their perceptions of anaesthetic awareness, or what's going on in anaesthetic awareness, are likely to be entirely different to those of a Western person having the same experience. So sorry, that's a long explanation of how what you're saying, Uncle Kin, has an effect. Okay. Bernard.
I can understand why it's important in anaesthetics to think about consciousness as being something that has levels, but I wonder if that is a metaphor rather than a fact. I'm thinking, for example, that in psychology we come across types of consciousness. If I can mention 2 or 3, by analogy with the person who only responds to commands, somebody who's accepted the suggestion that they should relinquish control, which is a way of describing hypnosis, is a person who acts on command. The concept of dissociation, somebody who is still fully aware, but in some sense is no longer owning the awareness as their own. The condition of somebody who is experiencing or re-experiencing in PTSD, where they feel that they are reliving something that happened a long time ago, and yet their experience is immediate, and, as it were, the past has come into the present. In that sense, we talk about types of consciousness rather than levels of consciousness. I just wonder if you could comment on that.
Well, just to say that my disagreement with J.D. and his concept of dysanaesthesia is that it's actually much more complicated, and there aren't just three planes of consciousness. There are a lot more, and in fact in a paper that Ian and I, along with Anthony Messina, published some years ago, we talked about the topography of awareness, where we postulated up to 5, I think it was, different levels of consciousness, which were progressive. I suppose my big concern about Jaideep's approach is that people may consider that having a patient who is responding sensibly to command but isn't showing any signs of spontaneous movement, that is an acceptable state to be in for general for surgery. And the problem with that is that we don't really know what they're experiencing. And in the study that Ian mentioned in his presentation, which was about midazolam as an anaesthetic, what Ian did was to actually ask the patient, are you in pain? And I think it was 2/3, wasn't it, actually indicated using hand signals that they were in pain. There wasn't any mechanism by which they could spontaneously show that they were in pain, but they were indicating, first of all, that they were conscious, and then they were saying, actually, I'm in pain. Now, I'm assuming that a substantial number of people, maybe a minority, but still a substantial and worrying number of people, can be in that sort of state and yet afterwards have no explicit recall. And I think there are several problems with that. One is obviously the ethical problem. Is it acceptable for people to be in a distressed state even if afterwards they have no memory of it? In my view, it isn't. And the second point is that we have growing evidence of cases where people have developed psychological problems even though they don't have explicit recall following surgery. So two, from my point of view, big reasons why that scenario isn't simply not acceptable. And so, I mean, I think Ian and I have been striving to raise the bar for anaesthetists in terms of what is defined as an adequate anaesthetic. And I guess my concern is that dysanaesthesia is going to muddy the water, and that people will be thinking, oh, well, this is Jaideep's dysanaesthesia, so it's okay, isn't it?
Can I just give a quick answer in terms of brain function, and then Jaideep can respond to both. Anaesthetics, although they act across the whole brain, in terms of the function, they particularly block function of frontal lobes by sort of blocking the traffic to and from frontal cortex. So they're blocking a lot of the systems you need for voluntary action, but they're having much less effect on sensory cortex and the sort of sensory processing that particularly contributes to those very vivid memories that come back to haunt people if they develop post-traumatic stress disorder. So although there's a mismatch between what people are able to do voluntarily and their experience, I don't think that means there's nothing in that to say that that experience is therefore going to be less distressing.
So I'll divide that into two parts. I mean, the question and the large part of Michael's answer and Jackie's was about the sort of science of it, which is are we talking about a binary issue, consciousness or unconsciousness? And I think, from your perspective, psychologically, and Michael said, it is not binary. There is a truth gradations. There's a slide I sometimes show. I didn't show it today. It's sort of from red, coloured red, all the way to very dark, almost black, and all the colours through blue, and that's the sort of range that you're going through. So that's the reality of it. The second part was Michael's the pragmatic approach. Is even if that is true, should we focus and dwell on that reality, or should we make it simple for practitioners? And so that's the two parts. I won't comment on the second because I think anaesthetists are cleverer than that. I think that they're more nuanced. But in respect to the first, the large part of my idea that there is something in between, whether it's one or several things, was actually, and the categorization of the responses was actually driven by the minimally conscious and the brain injured, and the dilemma there. It's a very similar question when you get down to it, but superficially it's a very different dilemma, because people need to know whether what communication is being had is meaningful or not for end-of-life decisions or continuation of life decisions. It's not so dramatic in anaesthesia, which is reversible, but fundamentally it's the same sort of question. Is the patient's response type meaningful or not? And what does that indicate of their conscious state? That's all I'm saying.
Dave.
Two questions. One to the anaesthetists, Ian and JD, and one to Jackie and Michael. First question, since you've thought about NAP5 and you've potentially seen a large number of people who might have implicit and explicit memory problems with voluntary or involuntary recall, has this changed any of the advice that we give to patients preoperatively who are undergoing anaesthesia?
Yeah, I mean, so we publish the recommendations in the report itself, and we're producing a sort of association glossy.
Do you actually say anything different to patients now yourself when you do?
Yeah, which is that the thing that's different is to recognise and pre-warn them about the possibility of brief experiences or as they go to sleep, which may include the sensation of achieving the mouth and the brief experience of feeling weak. And if that's all you say, then we think, it's not been tested, but we think on that evidence that primes them sufficiently so that if you look at more than 90% of the reports, that would encompass and they would recognise that as something you told them about.
Okay, Michael and Jackie, if I sent a patient to see you who had, you thought had post-traumatic stress disorder following anaesthesia, how might you help them?
I'm going to let Michael answer because I'm not a clinical psychologist.
Basically, it's quite similar to the general case of post-traumatic stress disorder, where someone has had a very traumatic and life-threatening experience, which might have been a road traffic accident, for example. But essentially, the important thing is to talk through and analyse the nature of the symptoms. So we're talking mainly here about flashbacks and nightmares and the sorts of things that they're avoiding. And when you do that, you get a real understanding of what's really frightening them or has frightened them during the traumatic experience. Typically, in my experience, people actually stop the nightmare or stop the flashback just before the most important things happens, because they're so afraid of the most important thing, they're actually avoiding it in their minds. And so the technique with PTSD is to actually find out what that really terrible thing is and actually gradually and gently expose the patient to that idea. And when you do that repeatedly, there's lots of empirical evidence that it's very effective at overcoming PTSD. NICE also recommends EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which basically is quite similar in that it involves the patient actually dwelling on the trauma itself and the very severe part of it that maybe they're avoiding, but at the same time the practitioner will get them to move their eyes from right to left at about 1 second, a rate of about 1 second. And again, although it sounds like hokum pokum, it really works. There's lots of empirical evidence that that also will reduce PTSD symptomatology.
Could I just say something to the, I don't know if this is working, to the anaesthetist here, in terms of consciousness? Because I'm pretty sure none of you here have ever used the isolated forearm technique, but I'll bet all of you have had a patient who you're using muscle relaxants on, and they're wearing off a bit, and maybe the patient moves their eyebrow, or the nurse tells you patient's moving her foot. That's the time to speak to your patient. You want to find out what's what? Ask the patient, can you lift your right eyebrow or move your left foot? And you'd be surprised when they do.
And just to add to that, your question was decidedly about pre-operative. But Ian's quite right. During surgery, if the patient moves or shows signs of awareness, NAT5 is very clear. The first thing to do is, as Ian says, speak to them. The second thing is deepen anaesthesia. And then only then do you add more muscle relaxant.
Speak to them, reassure them, you know what's what. And I've had colleagues come and ask me, they have a patient who's been awake during the previous operation, and ask me, should I use isolated forearm technique? And I say yes. Not one of them has ever used it, because they're frightened. What do I do if the patient wakes up? And they haven't used the technique.
So that order is almost the reverse of traditional teaching, which was to give the relaxant first and forget about the rest.
I also, having spent quite a lot of time in operating theatres observing anaesthetists, I think a lot of anaesthetists are really concerned about talking to the patient on the operating theatre table because of a fear of losing face with their surgical colleagues. I think that's very unfortunate. I really would want to encourage you to speak to the patient, especially as Ian has said, if there's a movement, it's important for them. And in terms of my own experience of PTSD as a result of ARGA, one of the most traumatic aspects was the fact that they felt that no one in the operating theatre understood their predicament. So to actually have someone say, I know what you're going through, it's okay, we're going to increase the anaesthetic, hugely reassuring and, in my view, ameliorative, preventative indeed, prophylactic.
Could I just ask about the ASA guidance? Because in the American Society of Anesthesiology guidance for this, they suggest giving midazolam. Now, midazolam may not put your patient to sleep, but it will probably ensure that the patient doesn't remember anything when you go to ask them about it afterwards, which is not really what we want to be doing, because midazolam will really whack your ability to recall things, but it will not stop you experiencing things necessarily.
I just add that midazolam also doesn't remove any implicit memory, so you might have this kind of hidden memory of being extremely traumatized that would make it much harder then to rationalise it and come to terms with it, because you don't know it's there, but it might still be affecting your recovery.
There's also, of course, the myth that it abolishes retrograde. So in other words, if you've got a concern that the patient might have been conscious, that you bang in a load of midazolam with the hope that it will blanket out any memory. It doesn't work in retrospect. It only creates anterograde amnesia, so forward amnesia. So that would be a vain act, if not unethical. Okay. Okay, well, we'll have perhaps 3 questions. Jonathan.
So I'm a psychology undergrad, so I may not know the area particularly well, but you mentioned how sometimes you'll have instances of PTSD after operations and things like that, but you'll also get cases where there's kind of nothing. They'll think, that was an unpleasant experience, but I can move on. Have there ever been instances of post-traumatic growth? Because you'll see post-traumatic growth in areas like domestic abuse. You'll have survivors who'll think, after this experience, I'm stronger, I've had this experience, and I've kind of improved because of it. Have you ever seen that in your area?
Was there anything in the NAT5 reports?
No, I don't think so, but in NAT5 it was quite hard to get a sort of people's full psychological experience. They tended to report, I had this problem, but there wasn't usually an opportunity for people to say, and these bits of my life are great. So I think the absence of it in the data doesn't mean that it didn't happen.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I'm very well aware of the positive psychology, traumatic growth angle on PTSD, and I have seen indications of growth in my patients, but it's not something that I've seen anything in the literature about, so there haven't been studies, as far as I'm aware, of post-traumatic growth in these particular patients. Okay, thanks. You had a question, yeah?
Thank you for this excellent talk this morning. So just a comment and a question. I had a patient, so I'm an anaesthetist, I had a patient who had rivicurium apnea after extraction, after a dental procedure. And interestingly, I recognised that that was the case, and I spoke to the patient and did exactly as you've articulated. I said, I realise you're awake, I realise you cannot breathe, I realise you cannot move, I understand what is happening, I will now put you back to sleep. And the patient remembered every single word I said, and was very, very grateful, and said as soon as he heard those words he relaxed and knew it was going to be okay. And they subsequently investigated him, and his family was subsequently investigated for substantive apnea, and there were no negative sequelae from that experience, so just to concur from personal experience. The question really was, I sometimes have patients who have said, oh, I was having a very nice dream after they wake up from anaesthesia. In the panel's opinion, where does that lie on the sort of consciousness to unconsciousness construction planes? How does one interpret that as an anaesthetist, in other words?
There's a study that Kate Leslie did of dreaming, and it seems to just be completely separate. So dreams typically happening towards the end of surgery when the anaesthetic's wearing off. Dreams tend to be positive, they tend to be reportable straight away, whereas sometimes it can take days or weeks for the actual memories to sort of be slotted together in a way patients can report them. So dreaming seems to be separate. It doesn't seem to be a proxy for this person was awake but doesn't have memory, but they did dream, so we should be worried about it. That's my...
Yeah, I don't think there's suggestions it's clinically significant in that sense.
I did have one patient who hadn't responded during the operation, and when I went to see her afterwards, she was able to repeat word for word what I'd asked her, but she hadn't actually squeezed my hand. And so I asked her, and I said to her, but you didn't squeeze my hand. She says, I was having a wonderful dream, and every couple of minutes your voice was interrupted, and I was determined to ignore you and enjoy my dream.
Very last question.
How many PTSD cases do you get from Leicester
No, I didn't hear the question.
How many PTSD cases are referred to me from Leicester? I don't get very many at all, because basically the rate of referral is very low. The rate of referral has declined from my perspective. It might be because of what was going on in Hull that Ian mentioned before that led to a high rate. But I think something that we probably all can agree on is that use of volatile agents has had an impact on the rate of awareness. Although, as far as I'm concerned, it's still about 1 in 600, and Jaydeep and I will probably disagree about that because I don't take much store by the NAP5 data because of the fact that it was reports rather than it involves a patient actually having the confidence and courage to go to their anaesthetist and say, did you know you didn't do your job properly and you didn't keep me asleep? And actually it's only a small minority in my view who have that sort of courage and confidence to do that, and the majority won't come forward in that way. But to answer your question, I'm probably getting maybe 2 cases a year, if that. That's the sort of rate from Leicester. I get referrals from all over the country as well, but sorry.
Do they fully recover from the PTSD? Do they fully recover?
Usually they do very well. Yeah, usually they do pretty well. And a proportion will actually spontaneously improve over time. Yeah. Well, I just want to say a big thank you. I've got a number of thank yous to say. I want to thank God for all the opportunities that I've been given, and particularly opportunities to work with people like the three people who are sitting on the stage with me. It was a huge providential occurrence when a certain Ian Russell walked through my office door in Hull and said, "Would you like to work with me on the problem of anaesthetic awareness?" It's also been fantastic to work with Jackie. We've actually published things together, and also more recently with JD and with NAP5. That's another amazing opportunity, and I'm so grateful for all these opportunities. I want to say a particular thank you to Carl, who's at the back here, and Pamela, who were responsible for all the administrative arrangements and for sending emails to you and so on. I want to say a special thank you to my family, to Madeline, my wife, to Naomi, James, who couldn't be here, Miriam, and Benjamin, who's in Bratislava. So a big thank you to them. Really big thank you to my extended family, represented by my Uncle Kin, and Ellie, who's sitting next to him. It's just been fantastic to have had the support of not only my immediate family, but my extended family. There's probably lots of other people I need to be thanking. I want to thank Noel Robertson, Dr. Noel Robertson, and Dr. Steve Mellowish, who came up with the idea of the Festschrift. Although they couldn't be here this morning, they're going to be around this afternoon. And last of all, but not least of all, is a big thank you to you, and thank you for coming and for spending your time this morning with me. Thank you very much indeed.